Welcome to Cognitive Liberty. I'm your host, Clyde Lewis. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm Clyde Lewis, and welcome to Cognitive Liberty on the Liberty Beacon TV network. And I must tell you, I am very proud and very happy to have with me today Chip Tatum, who we had on Ground Zero a while ago, and he and I hit it off really well. He's a great guy, and we were talking a lot about just some of the weird things that are happening in the media that we're not hearing about. Basically, the narratives are unraveling on a lot of things, and a lot of them have to do with what's going on in Las Vegas. And I have said that the Las Vegas story is the story you're not hearing about. You heard about it for a few days when the shooting took place. You heard about the death and the casualties. You saw the sympathetic cards being played and the gun control cards being played. But then after it all was said and done, we still have a lot of mysteries going on, a lot of crazy things that are happening. And I had pulled in a lot of, acquaintances of mine. John Carmen, who of course is a Secret Service agent, served under two presidents, worked in law enforcement for 25 years. We talked to Billy Hayes, who was involved with Black Projects and knew of Stephen Paddock. He worked on the Heart Project and several other projects. And of course, Chip. I mean, don't get any better than Chip Tatum. Of course, we know that Gene knew Barry Seal. Of course, the new movie Out American Made, and he was involved with Iran-Contra. He was involved with the gun running and the drug running and all these horrible things. Why don't you, for those who are unaware, Chip, why don't you just give a little bit of background of how, I mean, this goes all the way back to, in your case, Vietnam. Tell us about your background.
Well, as a low lottery winner in the draft back in the late 60s, I won a spot in the military, and I shopped around in the military because I really didn't want to go in the Marines. I didn't want to go in the Army either. As I shopped around to the different recruiters, knowing that I would be drafted, because the draft board pretty well said you better go shopping because you're going to go in with the lottery. So the Air Force promised me that they would make me an air traffic controller. And even if I did go to Vietnam, I would be 100 miles away from the action in an air traffic control tower. That was good news.
Right.
So, and plus that had something for me, when I didn't plan on making the military a career. So once I was out, I'd be an air traffic controller, go to work then was a pretty good paying job. So I was set on it. I graduated in the top 10% of my class because I was gung-ho. I wanted to make sure that I could learn as much as I could for the future. And darn if they didn't put me in a special group, sent us off to learn how to parachute. That was cool. Sent us off to explosive school, sent us off to dive school, and ended up they made me what's called a combat controller. And if you can imagine, you're still an air traffic controller, but a combat controller, if you imagine here's the enemy and here's the friendly, you jump right into the middle and call in the airstrikes against the enemy. So that was my job. It's the Air Force equivalent of Special Forces.
So you did that job. How many years were you at that, doing that?
Pardon me?
How many years did you do that?
Well, that was my Air Force specialty for my, I think, about 8 years in the Air Force before they transferred me to the Army.
And so you were learning all the ins and outs of what could be done, intel, all of that. And then when you were approached, who approached you about other extracurricular jobs that you could be doing, such as what you did for the CIA?
We had a mission in Vietnam into Cambodia, and it was to raid the Phnom Penh airport. Lon Nol at the time was sitting on the fence and taking aid from China, taking aid from Russia, and taking aid from the United States. And the United States, the Nixon administration, decided what they needed to do was get this guy involved with the United States, because we needed the Cambodian army, the Laotian army, all to support the South Vietnamese against the Viet Cong, and so that we could slowly move out. That's move out. That's the same approach they're taking now, even in the Gulf. They're trying to get all the entities involved so that we can slowly move out. Well, we went in and we did what's called a black flag operation. We went in, jumped in, dressed as Viet Cong, blew up the Phnom Penh airport, including the president's Lon Nol's aircraft, left bodies of the sappers we jumped in with around the airport, and it was deemed as one of the most successful missions ever. However, they still think it was the Viet Cong that did it. I recently got a copy of the 25-year classified information that was released, the CIA Twix between Kissinger and Nixon, and I put that on our website, talking about how successful the mission was. And we were captured. And it was actually briefed by the CIA. The Team Red Rock was 13 men. It was briefed by the CIA. Colby himself did the briefing. He and the White Ghost and Haig, between the three of them, they handled the briefing. When it was all said and done, we weren't picked up. So we were left to our own skills, our own tradecraft to make it out of there. And unfortunately, we just ran out of ammunition. We ran out of room, ran out of ammunition, and we were captured. Two of us survived, myself and my platoon sergeant. I woke up in a hospital in the Philippines. We were rescued by a Marine Recon Patrol. I woke up in a hospital in the Philippines with wounds in the leg and a severe concussion from something that slid across the back of my head. Shrapnel, they believe it was, slit my head open. And I was debriefed, within a week I was debriefed by Colby, and he told me that I would be working for them. That the White House was worried that I might talk about this, and I fell under classified information. So he gave me a choice to work for the Air Force, stay in the Air Force, or come directly to the CIA. I said, well, this is a CIA mission, right? He said, yeah. I said, oh, hell no, I don't want to go to work for you. I'll stay in the Air Force. So they kept me in the Air Force, but put me under control of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And all my missions, everything that I did from that day forth, they were actually controlled by the CIA through the DIA.
You know, anymore, it just seems as though that if anyone mentions an alphabet agency, CIA, FBI, wouldn't a person just have a slight bit of trepidation about being a part of an organization that, you know, probably looks at you as being expendable at any time? Did you ever think about that?
Well, I didn't back then. I was 19 years old. And that's the recruiting process, is they go in after the young. They go in after the gullible. Everyone wants to be a spy. Everyone wants to work in intelligence. I mean, that's just a cool thing. You carry a gun, you carry a badge, you carry ID cards, you have the opportunity to be a James Bond, you know, and that's what they put out there. Look, I can be James Bond, I can be Mission Impossible, I can do all this cool stuff, but it's the gullibility is what they chase. And these they're really going after the young college graduates coming out and hitting the patriotic side of them.
But a lot of the times, most people who are involved with like CIA ops or covert ops, a lot of people don't even know they may be associating with someone who works for the CIA and not even know it. Sure,
you know, we had missions in the United States, and we weren't allowed. The CIA wasn't supposed to be working in the United States in those years, 70s and 80s. But we had missions in the U.S., and we'd walk into any sheriff's office, any police station, recruit them, and they'd jump all over. They'd do anything we wanted them to do just because they'd be working for the CIA and looking for opportunity to advance and perhaps climb the ladder out of where they're going. So it was very easy to recruit. Matter of fact, in South Florida, we recruited some sheriffs to block off over by Everglades City, block off the roads at night so that the drug planes could fly in, dump their materials, pick up arms, and fly them back down south. Barry was one that flew that.
Speaking of, as we move into the drug runs and the gun runs, you know, Barry Seal, of course, is you know, he's the topic of those who have been into this part of history, who have seen the new movie that you've consulted on, the new movie American Made with Tom Cruise. How much of that movie is Hollywood, and how much of that movie is reality?
I think most of it's Hollywood. There touches reality in there, just to say that it's the Barry Seal story. but most of it, I'm going to see it tomorrow night. But from what I understand from friends who were involved, most of it is Hollywood.
And
Unfortunately, they even the wife Debbie had a different name and was a blonde. So I think that they had some issues there because she didn't agree to what they were portraying because it wasn't true.
but a lot of the basics, such as Barry was a pilot who smuggled Havana cigars out of Vancouver, British Columbia, brought him in, and then somebody got wind of him and how successful he was at it and said, "Hey, how would you like to be, flying weapons to the Contras and the Sandinistas and what?" And first of all, it was taking pictures of the area, flying in, taking pictures, risking being shot down, and that's some pretty dangerous stuff. I mean, what is it that they approached you with? I mean, I know you were involved with a lot of the gun running and that sort of thing.
Well, I was active. I was active military at the time, and during the Iran-Contra conflict, we were in special operations with 160th Task Force 160, and that was formed after the problem in the desert in Iran during the Carter administration, where all the aircraft crashed. They didn't have controllers on the ground. They didn't use the right type aircraft in a multi jurisdictional operation. So they decided what they needed to do is they needed one particular entity, one particular group that flew together that could handle this type of operation. So they formed the 160th. They brought us in from all services. They brought from the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, the civilian life. We were actually controlled by National Reconnaissance Office. And so we were actually flying missions under the auspices, 160th of the U.S. Army. However, the 160th really didn't exist under the U.S. Army in the beginning. All of our TO&E, all of our aircraft and equipment, like the Loaches that we flew, weren't in Army inventory any longer. They'd been replaced by Jet Rangers, by Kiowas years before. And so we were controlled by the CIA. The missions were controlled by the CIA, and we were working for and the gun running. Look, we're military. We're taking weapons to Contras. We're trying to fight communism. That's the way we looked at it. But once I found the drugs on board my aircraft, when I had a hard landing, and the cooler rolled out the door and popped open, then it was a different story. I knew, and I knew earlier in my career, because Colby told me you're going to have to be very cautious in your career because you're in a very precarious position because of the knowledge that you have, and it could backlash. Look, a black flag, the United States attacking their own ally, that doesn't sit well with other countries either. So.
Well, and now if I don't know if you've checked any of the news, but if you look at European news and you look at Russian news, and you look at all these news organizations outside of the United States, one of the biggest confounding things for Russia right now is that they've been putting their satellites over ISIS-occupied territory, and they find it amazing that they're seeing, our men and our ordnance right there in the same territories as ISIS, and they're not firing on ISIS. And so they put out this statement saying, well, what's going on here? Why is it that we're seeing this going on? And then you think about Al-Qaeda, and you think about how they were our enemy at one time, but now we're supplying weapons to Al-Qaeda so we can fight Syria. Don't they worry about blowback, or is that something they just decide, hey, well, it's just job security?
Well, they have their narrative and they put it out in the press, and then that's what the people believe, unfortunately. In reality, we were the ones who formed the predecessors to Al-Qaeda. We had all these warring factions in the Middle East. We had the oil that was important to us. We had all these warring factions there. So we would put training camps in place. We had put training camps in place in Iran and Iraq, and we would train these warring tribes down there. We would give them arms. We would put military advisors, they were called in, to train them and keep them busy in the desert, blowing up blowing up palm trees and sand. And when Clinton came in, that was during the Bush administration. When Clinton came in, he decided, well, this is ridiculous for us to put this money and this training into those guys out there. So he pulled all support from them. And here we have all these well-trained, well-equipped desert fighters with nothing to do and no support any longer. So what do? They form their little bands, they form their little groups, they start going into the smaller cities, they start robbing banks, and that gets successful. They start kidnapping, that's successful. All this is providing money and funds and experience into them, and they're well trained to begin with. They were trained by SEALs and the Green Beret. I mean, they were well trained, and they just continued with that training, formed their own religious, because these tribes were all had their own religious factions to them.
Right.
And they continued, and then they found, hey, if we keep fighting against one another, we're just not going to grow. So these factions started allying one with another into what we call Al-Qaeda.
Well, and it seems to me that you can go all the way back to like things, Operation Cyclone, for example, and how we fortified the Mujahideen, which eventually became Al-Qaeda. It was done during the Reagan administration. And then you take a look at what Zbigniew Brzezinski had done with Osama bin Laden, and how we made deals with Osama bin Laden to take out the Russians during the Russian-Afghan war.
Right.
And a lot of people, as much as we hate to admit this, Osama bin Laden had a lot to do with the fall of communism, because he was the one that fortified the troops to go against Afghanistan, which of course we made a deal with Israel, we made a deal with this with Muslim groups and other groups to go in and fight the Russians to bring down communism. So it's really odd how they play this game of retrocausality where they make deals with these criminals like Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. I mean, you see Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein when they're fighting the original war, the Kurd war, and then all of a sudden we wake up and they're our enemies. Osama bin Laden is our enemy now because, well, wait a minute, didn't he help us defeat communism? Well, now he's our enemy. And then, wait a minute, didn't we say that Al-Qaeda took out the Twin Towers and the Pentagon? But why are we fighting with them now in Syria, and why are we palling with them? And then you have Russia saying, well, here's something bizarre. Why is it that we're all hanging out with ISIS? And we're supposed to be working together to fight ISIS. And I don't think the American people have any idea just what goes on when you have a group of individuals like the CIA that don't answer to Congress.
Well, we tried to answer to Congress, and that didn't work. I'm going to tell you. We tried to answer to Congress because every time we would have a mission then we'd throw it in front of Congress, they would call it out. I mean, they couldn't keep their mouths shut. We had the Grenada invasion. Let me give you a good example. The Grenada invasion. That was called 160th, was one of the groups that went in on the Grenada invasion. The Grenada invasion was our first opportunity in 160th Aviation to test the new platforms, the new arms platforms and equipment that we had and we'd been training on. The night vision goggles, flying night flight in, our escape, our evasion tactics that we use for Russian radar-guided anti-aircraft systems. All of this stuff and all these arms, all these systems we put into place, operational systems in the 160th. It was a perfect platform. So that's where North jumped in and decided, let's put the 160th in here. So the whole idea was to go under the cover of darkness, get in under the cover of darkness, surprise the Cubans who were at the airfield. They had a ZSU-23-4 sitting there, which is a radar-guided anti-aircraft gun, 4-barrel anti-aircraft gun that just would rip anything apart coming in. We had to go in under the cover of darkness. If we didn't go in under the cover of darkness, we were just sitting ducks coming in, 20 feet off the water, straight into the airfield. The president announced to Congress, I think it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, that we were going in. One of the congressional leaders decided it was inhumane, even though we had told Cuba several times that get the Cuban military out of there or we're going to go in and take them out ourselves. Even though we told him that, this congressman decided it was inhumane to do that. So he called, his office called the Cubans and told them that the attack was on and we were coming in. So the Cuban army turned their weapons right down the runway, all those 4 barrels just sitting there waiting on us to come in. I lost good friends in that because the CIA, because it's a black operation, because it's a coded operation, and Congress couldn't keep their mouth shut.
So you're saying
you have that issue.
It has to happen.
Yeah,
That's what you're saying.
You can't let them know. There's too many loose lips who can't agree on anything.
So what is your opinion on the idea that, you know, since Kennedy, the CIA has been crucial in running government, that most of the presidents we've had after Kennedy have been basically CIA puppets, if you will, answering to the CIA. But now we have also the warring factions within the alphabet agencies, the deep state. How do you feel about all of those ideas and how they're there to destabilize the United States of America?
Well, it certainly has, especially since 9/11 and the attempt to bring all these entities in together. They've always had conflicts. The FBI didn't like the CIA, CIA didn't like the NSA, and all the 3-letter agencies had their own conflicts, and they had their own territory, and they felt that they were being violated in those territories. To give you an example, when Clinton came in office, because of issues with the CIA, he took the CIA out of most of the embassies overseas and replaced them with FBI. So here you have the FBI going in, who have no circle of influence, who don't have their own intelligence nets that they've set up, and so they had to start all over and gaining intelligence. So I feel that it was purposefully done to destabilize America. There's no doubt. There's no doubt.
I mean, a lot of it we saw in the Ukraine, actually, where they were dealing with the EU and how the EU wanted to go in and they wanted to, start up some trouble in Ukraine. And then, of course, the United States, you have people like Victoria Nuland and others who are saying things like F the EU. But you look at what her background is, and that is her husband, of course, is one of the head neocons. I don't think people understand the difference between conservative and liberal. They're just barely understanding that. They say they're conservative, they say they're liberal. And what's funny about this is that what they don't understand is that there are neocons in the mix, and those neocons are turning conservatism into a form of fascism, while you have the neoliberals that are turning, whether they like it or not, whether they want to hear it or not, they're turning the left into a form of Nazism. So when we have the two clashing together, we're looking at a more diabolical machine of state socialism that I'm sure that will encompass the United States probably within the next 10 to 12 years.
I think you're right on target on that. You see it. You see the narrative today and what the media is doing, and what the different factions of the government are doing in the exact narrative that you're talking about. There's no doubt. Look, I'm no big fan of Russia. Believe me. In our internment camp, Russians were there involved in the torture of us. So I'm no real fan of Russia. But I have to say, Putin took Ukraine with rarely a shot fired.
Right.
Why can't we do something like that? Well, instead of throwing our boys out there to get their asses shot up.
Right. And we always talk about Russia being an adversarial nation, but they were at one time more adversarial than they are now.
Right.
And so I think what it is it's like Goebbels said, if you tell a lie enough, people will start believing that Russia is a terrible adversarial nation to the United States of America. And yeah, they've had a checkered past, but you also got to remember that they helped us win World War II. They've helped us with a lot of things over time. But now, again, we're back to this Cold War attitude. But it's odd because the Cold War attitude used to be on the far right about Russia. Now it's the far left pushing the Russian issues. And it's almost as if everything that was once one way is another. And that's why I have to tell you, it is obvious that the neocons and the neoliberals have control of everything because of the fact that it doesn't make any sense the way it is now. We have a party like the Democratic Party responsible for things like the KKK and other things. And now they're non-KKK, and now they're erasing everything in their past. They're removing statues and all this other stuff. And I said once, isn't it funny that Robert Byrd, who was a well-known KKK congressman, his statue is still in the rotunda, and yet they haven't removed it. I just think this is a big psyop. They're using agitprop on the American people, and people who don't understand, who didn't take civics in school, obviously, who know nothing about how the communist groups worked, didn't know anything about Marx, didn't know anything about Lenin, hell, didn't even know anything about Stalin, and yet on the same side, you have the conservatives that have been grown their whole life with Bircher fathers and groups saying communist bad, and so they take it from a different angle. It's always about the evil communists. From the other side, it's not the evil communists, it's the adversarial Russians. And so we certainly are not on the same page in this country, and we have no idea, we have no clue about the covert activities in war where it doesn't matter. Political parties don't matter, and even in some cases, nationalities don't matter. They make deals all the time with Al-Qaeda, who was once an enemy. They make deals all the time with Russians. I remember there was a case where I can't remember who it was, can't remember the guy's name, but they were negotiating after the wall went up in Berlin. And they were negotiating with this guy because he was basically exiled to the East, East Germany, and he wanted to get out, and he was an American. And so they had to go in and they had to make deals with Russia, and they had to say this, and they make certain concessions, and certain people have to die in exchange for others. And this is how it's done. It's a trade of bodies and resources. Has nothing to do with sometimes ethics or morals.
No, I mean, one of the big places that we used to do all of our negotiations, we would go to Amsterdam. That was the place where we would all come together and negotiate with various countries. Look, Russia, we always need a bad guy. That's something that's in intelligence we've always worked toward. We need that bad guy. We need someone to show the United States this is a bad guy, and where we can deflect from news and from things going bad here onto that bad person, bad entity. So we're always looking to grow a new bad guy, and that's what we do. That's part of the intelligence entity, is growing these bad guys. Part of what we use the media for, or part of what the narrative is. Make this person a bad guy.
And of course, you talked about black flags and false flags, and how going back to the Northwoods document, they were going to blame Cubans for blown up buses, blown up planes that the military was going to do themselves, or at least intelligence operations. There were probably offshoots of the CIA or even offshoots of the FBI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we normally wouldn't do it ourselves as officers, but we all had assets out there that we could pay to get things done. So,
speaking of assets, and speaking of timely arguments, especially with the Barry Seal movie out there, and now that I have you here, let's talk about Stephen Paddock for a moment, the alleged shooter in the Las Vegas attack. There are so many people that have written off the narrative because the mainstream have unraveled the narrative, and with all of the PR that we're seeing happening, with the PR hijacking the narrative. And matter of fact, Jesus Campos, who was one of the security guards, wound up missing when he was going to be questioned, and then lo and behold, he shows up on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And people go, wow, that was a coup. Not really, because MGM has an affiliation with Ellen DeGeneres. So what we're seeing is MGM trying to take back the narrative by passing Jesus Campos off onto a show. And I'm thinking, why of all the shows? Because at least Ellen can give it a good spin. But what I'm seeing from this is a lot of what we're talking about. This seems to me like whatever Stephen Paddock was involved with, and believe me, we're finding out a lot more. In fact, a lot of people are speculating that he may have been involved with Operation Cyclone. And if that's the case, he was supplying weapons to the Mujahideen, and that's a long time ago. But the question is, do we or can we speculate with I guess, good confidence here that maybe Stephen Paddock was involved with something dealing with weapons, drugs, and even human trafficking?
I can say the indicators, and that's what you do in intelligence. You look at the indicators, and all the indicators point to the fact that he wasn't who they put him up to be. That's a fact.
Because you commented, you said that working for defense contractors working for Raytheon, working for Morton Thiokol, going on all these lists of defense contractors, black budget projects, mine science projects. Being an accountant doesn't make you $1 million or make you at least a multi-millionaire of $5 million.
Not at all. No, that money was coming in, and it was coming in from somewhere other than his salary or his retirement. That's a fact.
Do you think maybe
and arms is an easy way to do it,
right?
Especially with the contacts he would have made. Look, Raytheon, all these people are defense contractors, that's where he has access to arms. That's where he has access to buyers, to sellers, to everything. And working in those entities makes him a perfect person. If I were looking for someone to do something for me, I would look in those entities, and I would try to recruit someone out of there. Accountants are good. Accountants are good because they're bean counters, and you can count on them to be very straight in what they do, and very, very narrow-sighted, so they're not looking at the whole picture, and that's important. You don't want them to see the whole picture because you want to keep them on track right there. So an accountant is a very good person to use in this type of operation, so that they're not wise enough to see what we're going to do, how it's going to end up for them.
Well, it's interesting. If you look back in the records of the planes he owned, one of the planes right now is in the hands of a group called Volant, which is a company that provides services for defense clients. And when they say services, they don't go into detail, but I'm sure what those services are getting weapons to the right people. And there's also, we did some checking on a business license that he had. He owned a company, or actually he was the principal in a company called Paradise Ranch. Then there was another company that's Paradise Ranch, well, actually it's Paradise Ranch 21, and then his ex-wife had one called Paradise Ranch 22, and a number of people that he associated with had this Paradise Ranch affiliation. And what's odd is there's also a hub of this Paradise Ranch business in the Philippines. And their goal, according to what I was reading, this Paradise Ranch goal, is to fly Filipino children to the United States. Now, we wonder why are we flying these Filipino children to the United States, or we're wondering why Vegas would be in operations to possibly fly, child prostitutes to these areas, because I was involved back when I first started Ground Zero in investigating the Thai Chinese triad trade, where opium and children, the boys of Pattaya Beach, all of them were exchanged for money and for opiates. And the thing is that the families would sell their kids, for these prostitution, and for a small fee, German businessmen would come in and they'd buy these kids. They could do whatever they wanted to. They could even kill them if they wanted to. And so we're through.
Look, what do you have in Las Vegas? You have a couple of huge companies that run their own charter services. You have Wynn, the Wynn Group. You have the Adelson Group, Adelson has 747s, or had, and they fly internationally. What better type of equipment do you need? He didn't need to physically fly. Those smaller aircraft could be used for shuttling once they're here also. But to have those contacts in the Philippines, to have those contacts in China. Look where the Adelson casinos are now. Look where Wynn, all of them are expanding over to the Asian market. And it's also very, very easy to
the Saudi Arabian interest as well. There's plenty of Saudi Arabian interest now in Vegas. So between Saudi Arabia, the Philippines, and you look at what's going on in the Philippines right now. I mean, so many factions down there, ISIS in the Philippines, all these other groups in the Philippines. I don't know if he had his hands dirty and giving the weapons directly to these operatives, but I'm sure he had connections with the FBI doing these types of things for domestic terrorism. And case in point, there was a Garland, Texas attack. It was the Dra Muhammad terrorist attack in Garland, Texas. And what had happened is that there's now a security guard that was there that is suing the FBI because he claims that the FBI knew of these two terrorists. One was, I'm trying to think, one was named Sufi, and I think the other one's name was Elton Simpson. These were two terrorists that went in to try and kill these people during the Dra Muhammad affair. They went in and I think they were killed by the FBI agents. But what had happened is this security guard, again, in this same type of, narrative, security guard gets shot, and he decides he's suing the FBI for $8 million because he said that there was an FBI agent sitting in the car watching this, knowing this terrorist attack was going to go down, and it was another one of those weapon sting operations where they take a person. There's a guy named Mahmoud that was actually a young boy here in Portland. He was a Muslim kid. His parents divorced. So here he was thinking to himself, oh my God, I moved to the United States. Everybody, my father, lost his Muslim, he was losing his Muslim character. I'm getting all burned out on the United States. I don't like it. I'm a conservative Muslim. I don't like this stuff. So what I'm going to do, I get a call from someone who says they have an agent in Pakistan or somewhere else. They're working on giving him the materials to make a bomb. They put him in a van with fuel in there so it smells flammable. They put him in there, say they have ammonium nitrate in the van. They take him out to this area, and then when the Portland Christmas tree is about to be turned on, he's going to push a button and detonate a bomb and kill all these people. The bomb doesn't go off. He winds up in jail, and it's legal. They say that it's not an entrapment situation. It's legal. Same thing goes on with a lot of these situations. They set up these people who are, angry or disenfranchised. They try to radicalize them in some way. And then, of course, they go for the sting operation where they're trying to entrap them with bombs and other things. There was a guy in North Carolina just a couple days after the situation in Las Vegas, set up a bomb at a small airport out there. Didn't make the mainstream news. And then they announced that there was another plot in New York where there were two terrorists that the FBI uncovered that were going to blow up a subway and then grab weapons and from a high building was going to shoot a concert in Times Square. So, here we have all these narratives, and then we have the real thing happen in Vegas. It just sounds to me like, once again, we have one of these, I don't know what you'd call them, these sting operations where maybe they set up Paddock to be this guy that was going to make the exchange of weapons with either ISIS or some other guy. Didn't happen. They killed him or whatever. They shot at the security guards. And then whatever they did with the weapons is they decided, hey, we're going to kill all these people in the concert. And that's why ISIS is taking credit for it.
Sure. And I heard just today a recording that I guess the Clark County Sheriff said that they actually took out the shooter. Yet the narrative also is that the shooter committed suicide. So, whenever there's those conflicts, it's going to raise awareness in people, and people start questioning what the heck's going on here. Look, it's simple. You go after the naive, you go after the disenfranchised, these are the people you recruit to bring into whatever you want to do. You have your target in mind. You have the finale, what you're hoping to gain from this, and you recruit into that, and you build with it. And like you say, when it comes right down to it, and the person is, if the person is left alive, normally is not, then they're going to be in prison for the rest of their life because you have the Department of Justice behind that. Was it a setup? Sure, it was a setup. It was a well-planned operation or a setup. I wouldn't call it. I'd call it an operation. That's what.
It seems like, yeah, you're right. It seems more like an operation. And the thing that's interesting is it's always a question as to whether or not these setups are for turning the bodies into a political football, or it's exploited later. And that's the thing that the biggest struggle I have with a lot of people who listen to my program. Like I had a guy call me the other night. He said, obviously the motive of this whole thing was that this gentleman wanted to bring all of these guns into the Mandalay Bay. He wanted to kill all those people for the sole purpose of getting them to start talking about confiscating our guns again. And I shook my head and I thought, is it that he did that really? Or do we see politicians exploit these situations just like they wanted to exploit the Cubans back in the day of Operation Northwoods?
Opportunity knocks and they grab.
Yeah, don't let a good crisis go to waste, right?
That's exactly right. You betcha.
It's all about disaster policy and disaster politics. And of course, we You know, it's not a matter of how can we make this better, how we can prevent it. It's a matter of we need to do this. We need to take away your rights. We need to invade you. We need to abscond from your Fourth Amendment, your Fifth Amendment, no due process. And see, that's the problem. When you're dealing with these operations that go awry, and we kill the scapegoat in the case of Stephen Paddock, we have these answers, we have these questions that go unanswered. And the reason why is because for some reason in the United States, we've lost the idea, we've lost track of something called due process of law. So when you shoot a suspect and you do extrajudicial executions, there are no answers. There's only plausible deniability. There's only what they call the power of anonymity. If you can anonymously remove anyone who will talk in the end, then whatever project or operation, as you call it, happens, they can get away with it. And as we see in the Las Vegas case, they have gotten away with it. And, you know, there's something to be said about having no information coming from Clark County, having the FBI stepping in and saying, you're not going to talk about this, we're going to gag order everybody. And then all of a sudden, you have two security guards that were people of interest in the situation, conflicting stories and conflicting narratives, and they wind up on the Ellen DeGeneres show. That is the most, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Like you say, controlling the narrative. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's either MGM's controlling the narrative. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, we knew that the security guards were either arrested or they got a gag order. So we gagged them for a day or two, right? And then all of a sudden, the gag order is lifted. They go on Ellen DeGeneres' show. Ellen DeGeneres, of course, has a connection to MGM. MGM takes control of the narrative. The Mandalay Bay, you know, can say, well, this is the way it is because they don't want any lawsuits. And what I'm gathering here, and this is what I discovered this as well, in Las Vegas, there's this unwritten rule. You know, when you're here, you know, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Not just that, whatever happens in Vegas, if it just happens to be bad, it's erased immediately in Vegas. Like, for example, if someone ODs, I've heard this, if somebody overdoses on drugs or is found dead in a hotel room or is shot and killed in a hotel room, first of all, if someone ODs on the property, they immediately call in a crew to take the person who was OD'd off the property and make sure they're found somewhere else. So they cannot say on their property they had an OD. Or if there's some sort of a death that happens, they immediately try to get the coroner to come in, quietly take the person out of the hotel so they don't have to tell people that somebody died in this hotel room. So when you have the Mandalay Bay with a shooter who's killed, you know, 50 plus people and 500 injured, how are they going to erase that? By just taking over the narrative and not even talking about it and having the media go, you're not going to talk about this anymore, which they aren't. Mm-hmm. You know, we're back to, you know, kneeling at football games. We're back to Russian collusion. We're back to making fun of the president. That's what we're getting on the news every night now. We're not getting anything about Las Vegas. We're not getting anything about North Korea. We're not getting anything about intelligence that we may need to protect ourselves. And so the country is just like out of control.
I can give you a good example of that. I think it was about 84. We were at AP Hill in Virginia, West Virginia. And we got a call. I was in a medevac aircraft based out of Savannah, Georgia, out of Fort Stewart, Georgia, 3rd of the 498th Med Company. We got a call. We needed to go to Atlantic City and transport doing a medevac, a medical evacuation for a civilian. We had so we would do that as a courtesy to the civilian medical community because it's free transport, medical transport. We landed on top of the casino that this person had fallen ill in, and picked her up. She was the daughter of an admiral. We picked her up and we flew her to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We picked her up. She was already dead. She'd OD'd. But there's no way that they wanted to pronounce that there, so we flew her body basically to Winston-Salem. They pronounced her dead there. Exactly what you say. Exactly, Clyde.
Well, and it's obvious. I mean, if people were to know the truth, if people were to know just how these things go down, and that's the thing, is that what I'm doing, I'm feeling that what I'm doing is not, you know, they call me a conspiracy theorist, but this isn't conspiracy theory. what this is this is what reporters should be doing. They should be talking to the people who made the news. Like I'm talking to you right now. You are a part of history. You are walking, talking history. You're walking, talking intelligence that has been declassified. Your CIA, your former CIA, I say once CIA, always CIA. I don't know if you believe that. I'm just saying, you've had all that experience and now you can talk about it. But see, this could be on the mainstream nightly news and they could explore this. They have it in movie theaters now, just open. I mean, they had, what was it, War Dogs came before that, about the arms deals with the War Dogs. I don't know. In fact, my wife knows one of the guys that was involved with that. Yeah, and now they have Narco, and they have all these other shows talking about the drug cartels, Fast and Furious, and they act as though, well, the American people, they don't care about illegal activities anymore with their government. And yet when you say the government commits illegal activities, people tell you, oh, that's just conspiracy theory.
Well, they make it, what they've done is they've taken that and they've made it entertainment.
So you watch it in a movie, you figure it doesn't happen in real life.
It's entertainment. That's correct. That's how they're melding the minds of our people today.
So our leaders can get
That's
away
entertainment
if they just make it a TV show like House of Cards or Scandal, right?
Right. Wag the dog, whatever.
And I watch those two shows, so I'm not abashed to say, yeah, I watch Scandal and I watch House of Cards because it just seems to me. In fact, they asked Barack Obama, they says, you watch House of Cards, what do you think? And he says, it's nothing like that. I'm going, oh, BS, it's nothing like that. I think actually, somebody once told me that House of Cards is actually the Clinton administration. They're basically mimicking the Clinton administration. And I would say, with all the bad things they've done, and of course the connections to Mena, Arkansas, and the Bushes and the Clintons and their little drug trade that they did, I think that, we need to investigate even more some of the past misdeeds and sins of our past presidents, right?
Well, if for nothing else, to get a track record and to see how things go, where they go, so they understand direction and misdirection. And that's a lot of what goes on with this is trying to throw things in misdirection.
Well, and that's another thing. I remember when Barack Obama was elected president, they said something to the effect, well, why don't you go after some of the past misdeeds of Dick Cheney or, other people who are involved with the Project for the New American Century? And Obama says, it would sound like sour grapes if I did anything like that. So he didn't bother them. But for some reason, he feels the need to bother the new administration because it all looks good for this little revolution they want to carry out. And what's sad is I think we're building again for another complete explosion here in this country from a group of individuals that I've said it's a revolution with a fugue mind. They don't know why they're fighting. They don't know what this revolution is about. They just know they're pissed off. They just know what the media has told them, and they just have poster scapegoats that they want to point out to create these problems. And I think America needs to grow up and realize just how much of a national security risk it is to have this much division in the country.
Well, and one MO that we would use in earlier years, I can't talk about it now because I just don't know, but all these large media groups have large attorney firms that control them. That the attorney firms have so much influence, they tell them you can do this, you can't do that, you can say this, you can't say that, you're putting yourself liable if you say this. So we would approach attorney firms whenever there's a story that was going to be broken, something that was passed on that we didn't want to happen. We would approach the media attorney, that office, because they're all politically aligned. They're so big, these huge media legal groups are aligned, and we would always approach them and control the narrative through them. And I'm sure that's being done today.
Oh, of course. I mean, you look at Operation Mockingbird. You look at I remember Woodward and Bernstein. It was Carl Bernstein that was saying, or Bob Woodward, I'm not sure. They said that there are agents now, CIA agents within the confines of the news organizations, basically getting their walking orders from the State Department. Right. And a lot of the news that you hear is directly from the Pentagon. And I thought it was interesting to do some investigation. Of course, we see that there are a few people that may have or do have a background with the CIA, like Anderson Cooper, for example. He was in Cambodia doing some things for the CIA. And when people ask him about his stint in the CIA, he says, well, why are so many people interested in what I did for the CIA? What does that matter now? I'm a reporter. Well, it matters because we're wondering just how much of what you report is intel that you are being told to report, disinformation you're being told to report, propaganda and agitprop you're being told to report that's going to mislead the American people in directions, or at least push them in directions and approximations that the intelligence groups want them to be in. And that's what I am concerned about.
And these young interns that we train on their internships and put them out to work afterwards, we call it feeding the bird.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're already planting the seeds for the new intel operation that that may or may not be going on. You have your I don't know if they're sleepers, because they certainly are well aware of what they're doing, but all they need to do is get the trigger information and they're off and running.
That's it.
I know that you don't live in the United States anymore. I know that you know, you can be an outsider looking in on this country under glass. What do you think has changed, and when was the tipping point? What do you think has changed in the country, and what do you have any ideas on how we can improve, or are we just a lost cause?
You know, a lot of down south in South America, they have their problems. They have, but they have corruption, a lot of corruption. But you know, down there it's corruption, what we call corruption you can count on. If you know it's going to happen and you know they can get paid off, and so you can count on that. Up in the United States, they aren't transparent in their corruption. I think what what we look at from down there is we look at our Congress, we look at our lawmakers up here, and they're just, and we look at the news. Look, I have people down there who would have loved to come up to the United States and live, but after seeing shootings in schools and things like that, there's no way that they want to leave the country that they live in South America to come up here and live. They look at Congress. They look at this. Everyone talking about that. How can that your country be broke? It's such an enormous and such a wealthy nation. How can it be broke? How can they not look at and make these laws? Many of the countries down there, the congressmen and the senators, if they don't vote, they don't get paid. You know.
Well, when
it's just the whole system needs revamped. It really, you need to start in Congress. You need to make those guys vote yes or no, not abstain, not anything. And look, it's a yes or no vote, and you need to vote. If you don't vote, you don't get paid. And if you don't get vote 3 or 4 times, look, in Costa Rica, they tried to get Congress to do something, and they wouldn't take it to vote. They kept, going off. So the president called in the police, surrounded Congress, and wouldn't let them leave until they finished their votes.
I remember that. When I lived in South America, I felt the same way. I mean, they had corruption there, but you could count on it. But it was taken care of. And not only that, but I think people, when they're in a situation, they always say, well, here in America, we're free. I feel free in America. Well, when I lived in South America, even though they were under a police state rule, I didn't feel any more or less free there as I do here. And, because I could walk the streets. I could go and get coffee in the morning, get better pastries in the morning, go to French chefs and eat well, eat steak every day. I mean, it was steak on the table every day in Buenos Aires when I lived there. The only problem,
we have Home Depot down there. We have everything down there now. Anything and everything. The infrastructure is there. High-speed internet. One thing in what you're saying is, I just lost my train of thought.
No, I mean, I think people have a wrong idea. I think they think just because you have Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Disneyland that makes you better. But look, in Argentina, I had Coca-Cola, McDonald's, but I also had steak. And the good thing about that is that I didn't feel any different. I felt like I could do my thing. In fact, I had more opportunity there because I was an American. And that was the thing that was different, is that I was an American in a South American country, and they look to me and say, well, you're from America. What do you think? They call themselves Americans too, but you're from North America. You're from the United States. What do you think? And I'm thinking, we're no different. You guys speak Spanish. You're Indo-European. You're European. You're Germans. You speak Spanish. That's the only difference. We're all the same. And
And
I
a
just
lot of
think,
people talk about the great American dream coming up here with land ownership. Look, don't pay your real estate taxes. What happens to that house?
yeah,
Don't pay your homeowners association. What power do they have?
you have the
I mean,
BLM at your door
you
with an RPG, you know?
you never lose your home in South America.
Nope.
If you haven't paid your real estate taxes, they have taxes and they aren't high, but they have taxes. My farm, I pay about $150 a year on over 1,000 acres. You know, but if I don't pay it when I sell it, it gets taken out of the sale price.
Oh, yeah.
That's
And when you were there
you
too,
actually own your land. Up here, you lease it from the government.
you'd go to the bank and they'd pay all your bills. You
Yeah.
give your paycheck, okay, take all my bills, pay them, and give me the rest of the money. There were so many convenient things in South America when I lived there that I came to America and I thought, why don't they just simplify things like that, healthcare, things like that? And it's just because of the fact that Americans are afraid to change, and they're afraid to move forward into a future where things will be more convenient for them. And in the meantime, we focus our attention on needless objects. We don't pay the money towards the right things, but it's always going to go in the coffers of the military-industrial complex. It's never going to go anywhere else.
No, it's not. We're a war-based economy.
Definitely so.
Yeah.
Chip Tatum, thank you so much for being on Liberty Beacon with us, and good luck to you in your travels. And I really, really appreciate you being on the program, and I'm so glad we've hit it off. I just really enjoyed talking to you.
Pleasure to be with you, Clyde.
Take care.
Bye-bye.